What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's edition of the Dissident Film Club. Russell Dobular back from India, so he is back resuming his co-hosting duties here. One more shout out to my good friend Justin Van Voris, who sat in with us for a few weeks, but the king has returned, so welcome back, sir.
Thank you. I will take my crown now.
Yeah, we're going to do an Indian film. We are going to do Gandhi next week. And then I might watch the RRR movie because I like creature feature movies. Is that what it is? Is it about...
the creature feature? No.
Is it about a tiger that kills people?
No.
Oh, so then why am I agreeing to watch it? I like movies about animals that eat people. That's a guilty pleasure subgenre for me. I love creature features. I think it's because Jurassic Park came out when I was 5, and Jurassic Park for millennials was like what Star Wars was for Gen Xers. Just, wow, they could do that on a movie screen. And so I've always loved movies where non-human entities, be they aliens or animals or dinosaurs, eat people. Like that new movie 65 with Adam Driver, I would like to see that, even though it looks dumb. It's about dinosaurs eating humans. Who doesn't?
Well, what about
that?
Cocaine Bear?
Cocaine Bear looks kind of interesting. You know, it's funny. I pitched a project a few years ago to Hollywood called Heroin Sloth. It's about a sloth who just stays up in his tree and shoots heroin and is extra chill. He does nothing for the entire movie. But they said, well, what's the conflict? I said, well, there is no conflict. He's a sloth who's on heroin. He just sits up in his tree and hangs out. I think Cocaine Bear's better. I should have picked Cocaine Bear because a bear on cocaine actually does something. A sloth on heroin, not too many places for the plot to go.
You're 50 years too late for that movie.
Yeah.
You needed to get Ralph Bakshi working on that in 1973.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Nobody's going to take that pitch now.
No.
RRR, or as they call it in India, as I discovered, because I was very curious. I kept asking people if they'd seen it. They just call it triple R there. They don't
triple
call it
R.
Okay. That is such a weird, like, it's very strange. Like the momentum on that movie has just grown and grown and grown as an international hit. Now they just released it in theaters in New York.
Yeah.
It's been out for a while.
Yeah,
like, you've been able to watch it.
It's playing in theaters now, yeah.
Now it's playing in theaters.
I heard that, yeah.
It's well, I sent you the Critical Drinker commentary on it. I think there's a craving for a movie like that because it's fucking entertaining, man. It's the kind of thing. I mean, that was really the point Drinker made about it. It's the kind of thing Hollywood just can't do anymore. Like
there is a tiger in it, right?
That's a scene at one point in the movie. It's not what the movie is about. I told
because I took RRR meaning roar, like a tiger roaring.
Man. No.
See, no, all right.
No,
Look, I'm regretting having agreed to do this.
This is set during the Raj, I think in the 20s, and you know, it's like this buddy movie, action movie, but it's okay. And I got to see another Bollywood movie while I was there in a very famous Bollywood movie theater, which was one of the highlights of my trip, actually. Yeah, they do these fight sequences that clearly there's some influence from the Hong Kong Kung Fu genre, but then they've got their own spin on that. Like they're definitely coming out of more the Jackie Chan Beijing opera, like fuck reality in the ass completely, whatever. Bounce somebody's head off a raft, have them flip six times.
Right.
It's that kind of thing. But you can do that as long as you're consistent with that reality. It's okay. Like you can bend all that as long as that's consistent within the movie. And as long as you don't do what, if anyone's ever seen the classic Red Letter Media breakdowns of the Star Wars prequels, one of the points he makes is that there's no tension in the fight scenes because the way that they break the rules of physics takes all the tension out of the scene. Because it's so unrealistic, even within its own premises, that you just don't feel that anyone can get hurt.
Right. There's nothing at stake. Exactly.
Right. They managed to make you feel that there's something at stake it's a style. It's a style. Within its world, there are stakes, but
Right.
it's a very different way of doing this kind of thing than the way we would do it. Also, something I noticed not until really I was leaving, because I saw it in the airport. America has such an influence everywhere in the world. Particularly if you go anywhere in the Western world, that it honestly, and I guess it shows my chauvinism, but it's also dictated by my experience of going to places like France and seeing all the movies be American, right, in the movie theater, or not all of them, but a vast majority. No, you go to India, man. I mean, the movies in the movie theater are not American movies; they're Indian movies,
Sure, of course.
and publishing, going into a bookstore, honestly, I kind of expected most of the books to be Western, American, honestly. No, man. I mean, they've got a whole genre, like the way that we would have the Da Vinci Code. They've got books like The Mahabharata Affair.
Right.
They've got things like that. I took pictures of it because it was really fascinating to me.
It's its own world. There's a billion people.
It's its own world, of course, right? Of course. Like, once I saw it, I was like, yeah, of course. They have their own whole publishing industry that draws on their cultural traditions. And a lot of books about Indian history, and very much that's what was interesting to me about it, because you go into an American bookstore and we're just so self-obsessed. It's just all of it. And I guess I have tended to feel like it's because we're an empire that we're so inclined to nitpick over our own history and our own current events. But no, if you looked at the book rack in the Indian bookstores, no, it was all of this stuff rehashing the colonial period and talking about what's wrong with Indian society today and talking about the caste system. And yeah, I mean, just like you would find in an American Barnes and Noble nonfiction section, only all focused on Indian society.
Right, on their own country and the history. Interesting. All right. Well, we'll do Gandhi next week, since that's inked, and then maybe we'll do triple R, as they say.
I think it's really worth doing, because
if I'm feeling really ambitious, maybe we'll do it as a double feature episode. We'll do both.
Oh yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah. That would be interesting. Yeah, we'll call it our like Bollywood tribute.
Right. Exactly. There we go. That's not a bad idea. All right, let's get to the business of today. Today we're not reviewing a film. We are reviewing a comedy special by the great Chris Rock, whose new Netflix special, Selective Outrage, premiered on March 4th. Man, a lot of big things happened March 4th. You had this special, you had the workers' strike back, and you had the Marianne Williamson campaign launch. That was the day of the year so far, March 4th. A lot of big things happening on March 4th.
They were all related.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Recorded this at an auditorium in Baltimore, Maryland, to a packed house. Obviously, Chris Rock, one of the true marquee names in stand-up comedy, and obviously the most anticipated bit in this special was his inevitable addressing of the Will Smith Slapgate story at the Oscars, which he gets into at the very end. But before that, he does a full hour. It's pretty long for a stand-up special. It clocks in at like an hour and 10 minutes, whereas usually these specials clock in between 50 and 60 minutes. And when you take out the Will Smith thing, it was a 1 hour thing. That was clearly an add-on chapter sort of at the end, because he had to talk about it, right? That'd be like Bruce Springsteen walking off the stage without, playing whatever, Born to Run at the end, right? And so he starts out, I think, pretty strong. He starts out, because the thing about Chris Rock is he grew up poor in a family that was very conscious of the inequality between not only black people and white people, but also between rich people and poor people. He was born in South Carolina, but he was raised in Bed-Stuy, and his parents had him bused from Bed-Stuy to Bensonhurst, where he went to school with mostly white people. And he's talked about in the past how the fact that as a black kid growing up in Brooklyn in a poor family, a lot of his friends were white Jewish guys. He says it was always me and a bunch of Jews hanging out. Jerry Seinfeld is a good pal of his for that reason, he says. And so that upbringing really informs a lot of his stand-up, and I think this special starts out pretty strong, where he basically calls out a lot of the woke corporations. Like he has this great bit at the very start of the episode where he talks about Lululemon. I think that's what it's called. They sell the $100 yoga pants, right? Yeah. This woke company, the anti-racist yoga pants. He says, they put on their marketing, we don't hate anyone here at Lululemon. He says, well, you hate somebody. You hate the poor. He says, and, there's obviously a mostly African-American audience. He says, how many people here would buy a $100 pair of anti-racist yoga pants, or would you take the $20 racist yoga pants, right? And so it starts out strong. Ultimately, I think the special was okay. It's not one of his best. He gets into some extended biographical bits about when he was a child and raising his own kids, which was not terrible, but it went on for a long time. I think the second half is, a little bit fluffy. I think he could have trimmed down, at least half of the second half of it. So overall, I mean, I think Chris Rock is a major talent. He's one of these just intrinsically funny people. Like, Chris Rock is a comic in the true sense of, like, he is a court jester, right? And he's this, like, little skinny guy who moves around real fast. All the physicality is very specific and very well done and very well timed, whereas some of the other comics who are interested in nowadays, like a Dave Chappelle type, they are sort of more performance artists. They're as much an actor as they are a comic, and their shows are more these like one-man plays than full-on comedy specials. Chris Rock is like one of the old school, like a Jerry Seinfeld or a Richard Pryor or a Louis C.K. Where no, he is the true court jester. He is there to make you laugh constantly. He approaches comedy in that way, which ultimately is, I think, a little bit less rewarding. It has less potential for greatness than like a Chappelle, or what made George Carlin the greatest of all time, in my view, is he could do both, and he could switch in and out of each mode instantly. He could do the great physical slapstick broad comedy, and then he could launch into these 15-minute sort of like philosophical bits where you don't laugh at all, but you don't care because you're just so interested in what he's saying. Rock is more old school, which means there is potential for a lot of rapid fire laughs. And at his best, he's phenomenal. This was not him at his best. I thought it was decent, watchable if you have an hour, but not great.
All right. So I'm going to give you these two provisos. I can be a tough critic when it comes to comedy. You got to come right down my strike zone for me to really appreciate it. And I'm jet lagged, and I watched it in that state. Okay, so I will give you those two provisos. That having been said, I thought this was completely disposable. I thought it was a lot of shit that I've heard said better by other people, including Chris Rock himself. Man, like his best bits were probably the Lululemon bit and the Meghan Markle bit.
Yeah, the Meghan Markle bit was good.
And neither one of them was great.
There's no classic bits here. No,
there was nothing that great. And if those are if your highlights play as warm up bits that should be leading to something better, and then it just goes downhill from there. I don't need to hear 10 minutes about how weird the Kardashians are. That's right. It's not funny to me. It's not interesting to me. I certainly don't need to hear 20 minutes about your daughters. Right. That's really not interesting to me. And what really felt to me like this was crafted by somebody who, as you say, is a very experienced comic, but it's an experienced comic not working at his best, and frankly, maybe not working in his prime. He's putting together all those structural things of callbacks about his daughter having been a biter, but it's not funny. It's not funny. It's the structure is there, but what you're inserting into that structure is just not that interesting. It's not that funny. It's not that original. Okay, so you're going to press a few buttons about abortion, being pro-abortion, but saying that it is the murder of a baby. Okay, whatever. You didn't do that in an interesting enough way for it to be intriguing the way a Dave Chappelle would. If Dave Chappelle decided to do that bit, you'd come away with something.
Right,
Come away with something. And I felt like, I mean, that's easy to just be shocking. And what? You didn't open up any new ground here. You didn't open up any new territory. And look, you know, going at the woke corporations, that's my sweet spot. Right. And even that, I was just like, I've heard this said better by other people. It's just not, there's nothing here that makes me feel like I needed to spend an hour listening to this.
Yeah. No, look, I think that's all fair. I think that's, again, partly because he just stylistically is such a comic. Like, this felt like it could have been taped in a nightclub. And I actually saw an article on CNBC reviewing this. I didn't know CNBC did stand-up comedy criticism, but anyway, decent enough point, which was they should have booked a smaller room, because this felt like, especially when he gets into like the dating humor about dating young women.
That too, women. I thought was just a dumb bit.
Well, it was nightclub.
That I didn't even feel like it was. I didn't even feel like it made any sense. Like, it wasn't relatable. You know, it was when he was talking about how it is dating older women. Like, a lot of what he was saying was. It was almost like he said, you know, when you're dating an older woman and she has lavender skin cream. God, I hate that. It was like, what the fuck are you even talking about, man?
Well, I think he was talking about the experience of a rich guy
dating of a rich guy dating
an older woman who, you know, the version of buying a nice pair of shoes for a younger date is, you know, helping her get her roof repaired or her car out of the shop.
I got it. It's not relatable. And
well, that's the thing. He takes a bit. Sorry, go ahead.
It's not relatable, and it also seems to me that it's probably not as universally applicable as he's making it out to be. So you got a bit that just doesn't really have that grounding where it's going to make the audience laugh in recognition of the truthfulness of the bit.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, that there's sort of a mismatch between what you're seeing and what you're hearing there, because you're seeing this celebrity play to whatever that was, 1,000 or 2,000 people in a room. So you're obviously seeing this very rich guy in this very grand space doing what is essentially like nightclub shtick. Like you would see that at the comic strip or you know, at the Comedy Cellar. And, you know, Chris Rock is a consummate craftsman. Like, he plays those small houses all the time, just as Seinfeld will pop up at these small clubs all the time. This is what they love to do. This is what they were born to do, and they do it all the time, whether they make a lot of money at it or not. And so that's a bit that you can see. And with Seinfeld, it's the same thing. He's like a billionaire now who's still talking about like the difference between, you know, crispy cereal and soggy cereal, right? And so it's like this very small subject matter. But in this case, he's talking about the experience of a rich guy dating older women versus younger women. And you feel like, okay, this could be done in a nightclub, but it wouldn't really work there because we're watching Chris Rock talk about this stuff, right? So yeah, that and that was all in the second half, which I thought just kind of that was mostly, there were a few chuckles in it because he's really good at what he does. He's great with his face. He has an extremely expressive face. That's one of the things that's funny about him. He really does the physical humor well. But yeah, ultimately it was just kind of forgettable.
Yeah,
like, there's nothing in this special that you could even put in a best of Chris Rock compilation. Like, nothing would even make that cut, I don't think. Like the bullet control, you know, the classic bit. We don't need gun control, we need bullet control. That was a great bit. And at the time especially, that was a couple years after the Columbine shooting, I think he did that bit. So that was like, okay, that, you know, that was taking a really hot button controversial issue at the time and lampooning it in this ironic but ultimately very delightful way because of just the way he approaches everything. That's the other reason why it doesn't strike you as edgy, because he's such he's such a comedian. I keep saying comic. I don't want to say clown because that has implications. Like people take that as an insult, but I don't mean it that way. It's like he is so comical in his presentation of everything that he can approach these topics that are, yes, controversial. They don't feel controversial because he's so confident in his ability to make a crowd laugh. He doesn't feel like he's taking any chances up there. He goes up there, he feels like he can say whatever the hell he wants, and he's not going to get in trouble. And that's true, but part of the reason that's true is because he doesn't approach it with the depth that a Dave Chappelle would. Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the most controversial he got was with the abortion bit. I thought that was his edgiest bit. And even that, it was just kind of like, maybe if it had been within a better show, it might have played as a more interesting moment. I felt like he was going for shock value, and the bit wasn't good enough to justify the buttons he was pushing. And I'm all about pushing those buttons, right? So if I'm coming away from it and saying, okay, and what's your next bit? Very few of these guys, it's a very short list that are not destroyed by wealth, because it's really hard to be funny in a relatable way when you're that fucking rich. And when the longer you're that rich, the less likely it is you're going to be able to be funny. Carlin was able to escape that trap. He had an interesting enough mind that right up to his dying day, he was a funny, interesting person to listen to. Sadly, given what happened to his career, we don't know over the long term. Louis C.K. was managing to maintain that. But you have some of these other people, you know, if you want to go back over the history of comedy, some of them said, hey, I can't be funny in stand-up anymore, and just fully made the transition to movies. Eddie Murphy, who was one of the great stand-ups of his time, he gave it up. I remember this was maybe 10 years ago, he was talking about doing stand-up on Saturday Night Live, and he was scared to do it, and he wouldn't do it. He was like guest hosting on Saturday Night Live, and he was going to do a stand-up bit, and he backed out of it. He felt like he just couldn't do it anymore. It had been too long. Steve Martin was a really unique stand-up comic back in his day. And, he started making movies, and that was it. He never went back. And he was another one. There was talk about him going out and doing stand-up, but he never did it. I think that's probably wise. Like with Steve Martin, after 20 years of being a multimillionaire, had been funny the way King Tut, Steve Martin, the jerk was in 1978? Probably not. It probably would have been a sad display, right? Like Monty Python should never have come back and done their stage act. It was embarrassing, right?
I mean,
that was not a good idea for them.
The reason Carlin made it work so well is because he was a militant class traitor, in the sense that, he grew up a working class guy in New York City. He grew up with a true, I would argue, resentment or even hatred of business and people who succeeded in business, probably born of the fact that his father was a white collar sort of business guy, didn't make much money, but he worked in that world, and he would viciously beat his mother. So he saw this monster get up and dress real nice and straighten the shirt and tie and go in and present himself. Oh, nice to meet you, sir. Come this way. And then he saw what a piece of shit the guy was. And so that informs a lot of his attitudes, and it worked its way into the material. And so Carlin was just very, very hostile to the rich, every chance he got. He wouldn't Carlin would never do a bit talking about, not that Chris Rock was bragging about it, but Chris Rock talks about being rich because he has also an experience of being poor. So I'm not saying he approaches it.
A lot of these guys try to deal with it that way.
Exactly.
They try
Carlin
to do
never
bits
even touched
about
it.
being rich, and it usually doesn't really work.
Doesn't really work. No. Carlin never touched it, and you could tell why he never touched it, because Carlin probably didn't enjoy being rich as much as a lot of other people did. Because he was just hardwired to be extremely suspicious of capitalism, business, commerce, all that stuff. So that's why I think he was able to make it work. In terms of the most politically incorrect bit, I mean, as a black man, Chris Rock could talk about this in a way that white people couldn't, so you could say it wasn't as risky. But at the end, when he gets into the Will Smith story, he does say something pretty funny at the end, which is in Will Smith's new movie where he plays a slave. Right. Yeah. He was rooting for the master to beat him. He was enjoying watching him get whipped. That was funny. Like that was genuinely funny. I laughed at that. But with regard to the Will Smith segment, it felt like he put that on because he had to. It didn't feel like he was itching to talk about it. It felt like he couldn't do a special without addressing it. And so he tacked it on at the end and he talked about it. And he said something interesting, which is that Jada Pinkett Smith encouraged him to quit his Oscar hosting gig because her husband wasn't nominated that year. Right. I mean, look, Will Smith and his wife, they're fucking whack jobs, right? I mean, they're just total whack jobs. I mean, you want to talk about like people who are unrelatable to the common people. Like he's talking about, she cheated on him with her son's friend, and then she interviewed him online about it. Like they're strange birds. But that whole story just felt like he was doing it because he felt he had to. Like he felt like I can't do a special a year after this happened and not address it. He didn't bring anything particularly funny to it, except calling him a bitch over and over again. Right. He felt like that was something he felt obligated to do.
That I thought our Vanguard bit was funnier than that,
our Vanguard bit was much funnier. Yeah,
it was much funnier. Felt like he had a beef, but he didn't have a joke.
Right. Exactly. That's a perfect way of saying it. So yeah, overall, I mean, Russell probably liked it a little less than I did. I love Chris Rock, so it's always entertaining. I'll watch anything he does. I don't regret having sat through it, but certainly not his best. This was like Bob Dylan's, I would say. This was probably like Dylan's 80s period, like the early 80s, like Infidels, Empire Burlesque kind of thing. A few good things, but not great.
I would say this was like Dylan's commercials for the Gap.
Okay. All right. Interesting. That sums it up. All right, everybody. We will be back Sunday afternoon, 4 p.m. Thanks for watching.